Well, good morning. Welcome to nVision again. My name is Todd Borky. I'm joined by my esteemed colleague, Lori Johnson from Network Center. We have the pleasure this morning of talking about data analytics for everyone. So we're going to talk about analytics, about if you haven't started it, or if you're in the middle of it, or if you're at the high end of it, and want to keep it interactive, and so we'll leave some time at the end for some questions and answer session. We'll use a couple of examples. One of the first ones is that a Boeing 787 on a normal flight will actually capture about a half a terabyte of data. If you think back about the size of hard drives in the past, a half a terabyte of data is quite a bit of data. It's filled with meaningful insights, a lot of information, a lot of different variables in it, and that the sheer quantity of that data and analyzing it can be somewhat of a challenge. A recent survey said that 97% of executives are investing in analytic projects or have invested already in analytic projects. What's interesting about that is you need to really look at the business case or the business challenge that you're trying to solve, and that each of those analytic solutions or analytic projects are unique amongst themselves. Different verticals will have different reasons for using analytics. Some is a price advantage, some is a market advantage, and some might be a patent advantage as you look at things. We don't talk about return on investment from a business analytics or an analytic tool. We prefer to talk about it as a significant business value. You might go, why? Everybody else talks about ROI. ROI in analytics is relatively challenging to quantify. It's more subjective than objective. So we talk about significant business value, and it's leverage what you already have. Historically, you've already invested in your technology. Whatever your technology stack is, you've invested in your systems. You've invested time and effort in the data that you have. And you definitely have invested in your subject matter experts within your organization and how they understand the data. So again, significant business value with analytics. So analytics come in really 4 distinct flavors, roles, along a maturity path. So we're going to use a pyramid, an image of a pyramid here in a few minutes to talk about the 4 different levels and how each level supports the next above it. We'll talk about a descriptive level, a diagnostic level, a predictive level, and then a prescriptive level. Here's our pyramid. At a descriptive level, these are reports or analysis on what happened in the past, and it allows you to identify strengths and weaknesses of that past performance or that past data. So in the analogy earlier of an airline, this would be a very simple process of how many tickets did we sell in a certain market during a certain time frame. A lot of your systems may already be doing this for you and not even understand that you're really using an analytic tool to present that data in dashboards, KPIs, etc. The layer above that is called diagnostic. So a diagnostic level within an analytic solution reports on why something happened, and it reveals factors that make a positive or a negative influence on that performance. Again, in our analogy, if you look at a particular market for flights, and you look at the value of those flights, and you see that something has gone up or down, if you look at a market and you see decreased revenue or decreased seat assignments, why? What parameter has changed in that market? Is it a reduction of marketing? Is it weather? Is it a certain time during the year? So that's the diagnostic level. The next level is actually a predictive level. And this reports on what could happen or is expected to happen based on past performance when you change one or more variables. Staying with our example, if we do an increased marketing campaign in a certain area, if we do an increased campaign on vacation destination, for example, what will that investment of marketing dollars return in net revenue? And here's the important part. After you do that particular predictive slice of analytics, once it becomes past data, you can now roll back down to the descriptive level and see if moving that variable actually provided you with the business outcome you were expecting. If it did, great. If it didn't, you need to analyze why. What happened to a parameter that may have not allowed that to move forward in a predictive situation? Prescriptive. This is the top of the pyramid. And remember, every foundation is building on the other. So at the very top, at a prescriptive level, this reports on what should happen when you use artificial intelligence or machine learning. Sticking with our example, this would provide you with the exact price point of a ticket, the exact overall marketing dollars that should be used in a market to provide the greatest net revenue for that particular leg of a flight or particular zone of an area that you're flying into. I want to stay on prescriptive and talk about two other areas around AI and machine learning. I'll use railroads, for example. In 5 sections across the US, they have cameras on the last car. After that train goes up over a piece of track, they're taking pictures of that track. And then they're using machine and AI behind it to analyze any delta differential between that image on that track within those couple of feet compared to previous runs. They're looking at fractions of cracks within rail. A derailment costs X amount of money from a recovery perspective, and so they're using AI and machine learning to do comparatives of pictures. Rail wheels on a car are round, and as they go across the track, they're typically silent. They're also starting to monitor a clicking noise. If you hear a click, and you know that it's on car 45, and you monitor that multiple times, if that click is changing, it means you're getting a flat spot on a wheel. They'll stop a train for a flat spot on a wheel and take that car out of sequence. So again, depending on the vertical you're in, you can start at different layers. But just because you go from the bottom layer of descriptive into diagnostic, into predictive, and then into prescriptive, the validation always rolls back to the bottom level. So you're continually going up and coming down. Quickly, a show of hands. How many of you in the audience today are using analytics within your organization? Okay. How many want to? Okay. How many really don't know where to start? No. That's quite normal. And I think it'll stay that way for a long time because analytics is not a single project. Lori's going to talk about that and that it's a never-ending process. Think about this of where to start. What data do you have? Where is your data? What data don't you have? Probably also real important, what data will you have in the future based on investments that you're doing today and next year within your systems, within your technology stack? We heard Paul talk earlier about chips in shoulder pads, et cetera. I spent 3 decades in healthcare. That predictive opportunity can really start reducing the bend in that curve, whether it's a return on investment, whether it's catching a diagnostic evaluation for a patient sooner. Is it feasible? Absolutely. It doesn't matter if you're a 1-doctor or 2-doctor group. Network Center, we're working with a couple of those to do some analytic work in their healthcare platform. Or if you're a large enterprise, analytics is very feasible, it's cost effective, and it's a real opportunity to continue to drive value into your business as you move forward. Analytics kind of from the bottom up. When you think about building an agenda for your analytics strategy, you really want to understand where your strengths and weaknesses are from an organization. Is a strength that you have some data analysts or some subject matter experts that understand your data inside and out. They've been with the company a long time. They're really, really solid. Or is it a weakness? Is it a strength that you have one data set and it's really clean? Or do you have 6 or 7 data sets? You don't have a single source of truth, and that could be a weakness. Is your data operationally stable? Sometimes you migrate from version 5 to version 6. Data migrates across, and it takes you part of a year until you get comparatives to realize that maybe something didn't line up. So is your data operationally stable? Do you have a single source of truth? Or do you have 6 or 7 or 200 databases that you need to normalize data? Do you need a data analyst? Whether you call them a data analyst or a subject matter expert, it's those people within your organization, not only in IT, that understand what the value of the data that you have is and understand how that changes or can change over time. Do you have dynamic reporting? Or do you have systems that just provide data every 30 days? Or data that provides it every 7 days? Or do you have the ability to build dashboards with KPIs that are real-time showing what's happened? Real-time in expense, real-time in inventory, real-time in revenue. You need a business plan. Do you have a business plan around analytics? It's really not any different than building any other project, other than analytics should not stop. It should be an evolving and a continual revolving process of reanalyzing data. At this point, I'm going to hand it over to Lori to walk through a few slides.
Thank you. As I've been sitting here today and listening to some of the other presenters talk about data projects and listening to the keynote speaker, I thought, wow, this could really be overwhelming to try to start tackling this. So it's really, you kind of approach every data analytics project in just sort of the same mindset. So you've got an issue, right? So my experience, most of my experience is in healthcare and healthcare IT, so I'm going to use a healthcare example. I had an emergency department that was saying, hey, we do not get our test results on time. The lab needs to do something about this. So we dug in and we decided that we needed to find out what the root of our issue was. So the first thing that you need to do is you need to gather your team and develop your team that's going to work on the project. In my instance, we needed somebody from the patient experience and patient registration. We needed somebody from the emergency room. We needed somebody from the laboratory. We had our own internal data analysts and our own internal data reporting tools that we were going to use. So we just needed to get that team together from across the business units to make sure that every owner, every user was being represented. Since we're pulling people into this project, there's kind of that underlying cost that comes with taking people off the floor or away from their desk to work on an internal project. So be committed to that. It is going to take some time from those subject matter experts to get together and work on the problem. Once the team is established and you get together, we need to sit down and we need to say, okay, this is our problem. What are some of the things we need to know about that problem? So you want to define your business needs. You want to define your reporting requirements from that data. And that might come around some KPIs that you have for your organization. And it might be one requirement that you have, or it might be many. So in the case of my example with the ED, we had one thing we needed to solve, right? We needed to understand why lab result tests were coming back so slow. So we got our team together, and then we started looking at what data sources that we needed to pull in to understand what was going on. So we grabbed the patient registration system, We grabbed the patient medical record system and the lab computer system. And we got data coming in from all of those sources and combined that together. Todd and I have also been working with a smaller customer. They're a specialty clinic out of Western United States that they came to us. They had a list of 10 questions that they needed answered. And they had basically one business unit owner who, it's about 40 employees at the facility, and she knew the business from top to bottom. So we worked just directly with her and brought in the physician owner as needed from his point of view. So as we started putting all of the reports together from the laboratory side and from the ED side, we kind of started to see the picture of what was really happening. During our process, we had to make sure that we looked at the data every step along the way. So first place that you have to start from is looking at the data that's coming out of your existing systems. So is it easy to access? Is all of the data there? Is it I hate to use the word clean data, but I mean, it's very true. If I have to go in and really search in the data to pull it out, I might need to look at a different way to pull that data. And you need to make sure you have your subject matter experts come and say, yep, this is the data we want you to have. And you need to make sure that they are evaluating all of those data sources and data points to make sure that what they're going to hand off to the data analyst is clean and ready to go. And once that data analyst takes over, they're going to start kind of comparing that data. They're going to start lining up that data. And we want to make sure, too, that we bring our subject matter experts back in to make sure that the data analyst isn't making a mistake when he or she is kind of starting to combine that data. And once we go through whatever tool we've decided that we're going to use for our analytics, once that data goes through the joining of those tables, those queries, those rules, and comes out on the other end, you need to, again, have your subject matter experts come back to the table and look at maybe they were pulling all that information manually before. So maybe you have to have them do that piece and then compare it to what you end up with on the other side. Case in point for really making sure that you're looking at your data throughout the process, validating that data throughout the process, is the smaller clinic that we worked with had, we sat down, we pulled a month's worth of data. We ran our queries against it, great results, very excited of what we were seeing. Ran a whole year of data. Oh, awesome, it looks great. Let's go ahead and do it. Let's go back and pull everything and pull it in. So we did that, and we thought we were sitting good, and we really started looking through that validation process and starting to see some errors and some inconsistencies. And the subject matter expert from the clinic came back and yep, agreed. She's like, these numbers aren't making sense. So we dug into the problem, and it turned out that about 4 years ago, they did a data migration in their patient record system. And it was adding some additional information into the reports that we were pulling once we went back historically, and it was skewing our data. So if we had just went on the assumption that 1 month was good, 1 year was good, pulled historical and said, here you go, it probably would have led to some inaccurate business decisions down the road. So validation is so important. I think every data validation project I've been part of, everybody comes in and they're, okay, we need these things solved. We're not sure we're going to get there. And then the data starts rolling in and they're like, wow, I never knew this. I never knew A correlated to B. And they start getting really excited and they start saying, I want this. I want to bring in this data source. Can we do this? Yes, absolutely. But this is costing time and money, and it's taking people away from their daily work, possibly. So you want to make sure that you just really stick to those key elements that you identified early on, those key reporting requirements, and take everything else and kind of just put it in a parking lot and say, we're going to go to that on phase 2 and 3. Because we want to make sure that we're stopping and that we're seeing if what we're doing and the road we're on is successful. So back to my emergency department example. We got all of the information together, and what it allowed us to see was when the patient came in the door, when the patient got back to the emergency room, when the nurse placed the orders, when the orders hit the lab, and then when the lab went and got the specimen and resulted the tests. And fortunately for the lab, it showed that in the process of triaging that person in the ED, the orders were getting placed really late in the process of taking care of the patient, which from the nurse's perspective was like, I've had this patient here for a long time and I'm not getting my test results. So we did some work internally and we put the ordering process right when the patient came back into the emergency department, and that helped to get results back faster. So we took action right away. On the laboratory side, we're like, hey, we're good. We're getting things out the door in our expected turnaround times. This is wonderful. But as we watched the data over time and made the changes in the emergency department, we discovered in the laboratory that we had a couple of staff members that weren't entering the tests into the computer system in the lab as soon as they got back from the emergency room. And we had to just do a little bit of retraining to get them to do it right when they walked into the laboratory door, and we improved then the turnaround time from the lab side. So you might need to take action on your data, you might not, but it also helps you see where you're going in the future. Every project kind of has the same steps. So you're going to get your group together, and you're going to decide what your requirements are. You're going to look at, do we need to pull flat files? Do we need to pull CSV files? Do we have to have an API because of where our data sits? And this might take a week to get this figured out, and it might take 6 weeks if you have a really large group that needs to come together and make some decisions. But basically, we go into the data analysis. We're pulling that data out of those sources. We're making sure we validate it. We take it on to the next step where we're getting it into the analyst's hands, and we do all of the validation that's needed at that step. We transform the data and get it in the user's hands so they can start seeing the product of that combination of data. And when everybody's like, yep, thumbs up, let's go, you need to make sure that you take time to document what you've done, and then that your end users are trained.
Thanks, Lori. Success. Everybody wants to have a project. They want it to be successful. There will be bumps in the road. Analytics is not an IT ownership issue. Give your business leaders, your unit leaders, your organizational leaders within your organization, give them the ownership of analytics. Monitor the use of the analytics and adjust as necessary. In Lori's example of the ED, making adjustments along the road will really drive more value into your analytics. Validate, validate, validate. If something doesn't look right, look at it. Your subject matter experts, your internal people, they know the data. Focus on a business problem first. Don't just start with an analytics plan saying, I want to analyze a half a terabyte of data. Like, what is a particular business problem or a couple of problems, and start your analytics work there. Prioritize and build in processes for improvement. The best way to drive value for that high business value is to have actionable data and actually take action on it. Empower staff to tell stories. There's nothing better than having unit leaders, executives, mid-level management, data analysts stand up and give an example of how they analyze the data and how they were able to make a pure benefit to the organization. A couple of examples. As Lori was talking about, we've been using Power BI as one of our analytic tools. What you're looking at here is a graphical representation. Keep in mind when you present to your organization, raw data and numbers are just that. I'm trained as an accounting and a finance side person, but when you put a graphical interface in front of that data, it can really make a big impact to boards, executives, etc. What we're looking at here is a patient de-identified data set that says, here are my patients for a particular period of time and where they live. The dots are different in size because they can represent different things, quantity, value, etc. On the left-hand side, you may not be able to see it real good. The next picture here says, wait a minute, I just want to know my new patients for a particular date range, and there's a slider on top that we could, move that interactively. Here's where my new patients came from this particular time. And again, those dots represent something. Pop back. Maybe not. Here happens to be a third dashboard that I pulled from a Microsoft site. Here you have traditional bar graphs, you have heat maps, and again, you see geographical or GPS representation of some data and what the roundness of the value represents. Again, is it gross revenue? Is it net revenue? Is it inventory, etc.? Keep in mind later this afternoon, there's going to be a number of roundtable conversations going in here. So there's a lot of the presentations you listened to this morning. We'll have a table to talk about business intelligence or analytics right here starting at about 2:30. I personally could talk about analytics for a long time. They gave Lori and I a half hour. Lori was kind enough to let me take more than just half of that. So a couple of minutes left here. We'd love to entertain a couple of questions if anybody has any. All right, if not, thank you and enjoy the rest of your day.